and this is my kind of colleague, Lindy Brangman, who you saw before, and we will both be, I guess, presenting this workshop. I think it's of, we both have children with Down syndrome, but I want to really reassure people that the strategies and the ideas that we're going to be talking about are not specific to Down syndrome. That's just kind of a quirk of fate. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners and the land on which Crew meets, the Jagera and Turrbal nations, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For people who don't know Crew, I guess we've been around for more than 30 years, and I guess our whole reason for being is to work for positive change in the lives of people with disability, particularly so people with disability do belong and become valued in their community. And so kind of at its core, we're concerned that people with disability have the same opportunities as any other kind of citizen. And really there is a big focus on pursuing the good life, which we see to be based on kind of relationships, people being able to make a contribution and to be connected in their communities. So this is, I guess, a publication, and I think you will have seen this publication and have been sent a copy and been sent some of the kind of activity sheets prior to this workshop. But I guess what this work arose really from a belief that kids with disabilities are often present in their regular school. And if you talk to kind of parents, one of the reasons people choose inclusive education is because they want their children to belong to a school community with same age peers, and they want them to be kind of known in their local community. But actually it doesn't just happen. So one of the things we're going to be talking about today is that students with disability being in valued roles isn't something which will just kind of fall from the sky. It often takes intentional effort by teachers and educators and by parents and of course by the student themselves to make that happen. So these are kind of the ideas that we're going to be talking about. We're going to really talk about the benefits of valued roles. It's not the only way that people get to belong in a school community, but it's a pretty powerful way that you can increase the chances that your child will have friends and be able to participate more fully in the life of the school. Really, I guess we're going to be practicing tuning into your child's strengths and interests. One of the things I learned as a parent was to get much better at identifying opportunities for my son, Sean, who is now 25 and well out of school. And once you turn that into a habit, you just see opportunities all over the place. So if that's something we're going to start practicing. So identifying valued roles at school. People who've heard me present before might have heard me talk about needing to be a detective on all of the opportunities that exist in your school. And that's kind of the mindset that we're taking to this. And I guess looking at seizing opportunities, and a big message really is to not let yourself as a parent be ruled by fear, but really to be ruled by hope and vision. And finally, how do we, once we have kids in valued roles, how do we intentionally strengthen those roles within and outside the classroom? So what are socially valued roles? And I guess I want to acknowledge that this material is based on a theory called social role valorization, which has been around for quite a long time, many decades, and informs a lot of Crew's work. But really, social roles are those roles which are valued in our society. And by that I mean most of us have an instinct about the things that are valued in our society. So we know that the role of surgeon is more valued than the role of prisoner. We know that the role of airline pilot is more valued than the role of dole bludger. And I think, unfortunately, for people with disability, often they have been trapped in roles like welfare recipient or disability service client, rather than those roles that are valued in our society. And so paying attention to the crafting of more valued roles is a very strong protective factor for people with disability, from them being further devalued. When we're thinking about roles that make sense for people, it's important that they're typical to the person's age, gender, and school culture. So I'm old enough to remember when, for example, the role of ballet dancer was not a valued role for boys. Now, I'm not saying that that's right. Nobody says that's kind of right, but it's recognizing that if you pick something that's kind of not valued, it's not to say you don't ever go there if someone's passion is dance, for example, but you have to pay attention to some other things. So we would be saying it's really important to choose roles that are kind of the most dignifying or the most valued as a good starting point. You know, when I say it's kind of typical to someone's culture, it's going to make, in Australia, it makes more sense. There's going to be more opportunities for people to be swimmers than it is to be an ice hockey player, for example. And really where people are able to make a contribution, and we're going to be talking about that. So I think roles are those things that really have the capacity to change people's perceptions. So it says there a good test is that, you know, valued roles are done with valued people in valued places doing valued activities. And by that, we mean that you don't get to be seen as a serious artist if the activity that you're doing is colouring in a disability day service. So that's, it's unfortunately just kind of trying to unpick that we do as human beings all make assumptions based on the roles that people inhabit. So valued roles matter for students with disability is because I guess a dynamic that is there for students with disability is that they are often seen as kind of existing on the periphery. Often there are low expectations of their participation, of their full participation. There's not many opportunities for them to contribute, so they're often seen as the receiver of help by peers. And, you know, often even assumptions are made that they don't have the same needs for friendship and positive regard and to belong. So I see that even when I was a young parent, I think I was very grateful that the regular school allowed Sean to be there, and I didn't have the courage really to ask for more. So this is really about saying, you know, Sean, who's there with his friends, kind of Harriet and Julia, had every right to fully participate in all of the same opportunities as the other kids in his class. And as I got better at recognising that right, I got better at seizing those opportunities. So socially valued roles in schools provide opportunities for social connections, skill development, self-worth and personal value. And I'm sure that many of you have got lots of kind of opportunities, lots of things that your kids have been involved with, both kind of within and outside school, where you've seen that. So, you know, Sean was, you know, an active participant in the school performances. He was a swimmer and a swim squad member. He was a soccer player. He was a circus troupe member. He was an announcer at assembly, for example, and here he is being a waiter at the Mother's Day kind of morning tea. And I could see how important it was for Sean to have the trophies at kind of the end of the swimming season, or to have the same uniform as his friends in the soccer club. And they really added to his sense of identity and self-worth. He knew that, you know, other kids were not on the weekends kind of going to speech therapy. They were doing kind of fun things, and he wanted in on that. And it was our job really to honour that for him. I guess I also saw myself how much more easily I have made friends and developed really strong relationships through my roles. So if I think about Sean's school years, one of the roles that was really important was being kind of a fete convener, or fete stall convener. I never took on the whole of the fete. You know, being the tombola lady was actually a way that lots more people got to know me, lots more people interacted with me because they wanted to, you know, make donations for the stall, or I needed to kind of get volunteers for a roster. And all of those things were, it kind of moved you from being kind of anonymous and just there to someone who people wanted to interact with through that role. They sort of felt that they kind of knew you better, and those opportunities are there for kids as well. So I think there is a difference. I want to point out that there's a difference between an activity and a role. So there is a difference between kicking a soccer ball on the weekend and being a soccer player. There's a difference. I'm a doodler, but there's a difference between kind of scribbling on a bit of paper and being an artist. So I don't do any of the other things that a real artist would be. I don't select paints. I don't go to art galleries very often. I don't talk art techniques, for example. So a role, a valued role, has a particular set of patterns of behaviour and identity which are much deeper than just doing an activity. I do want to point out, though, that when you're thinking of roles for your child, there'll be big roles and small roles. And that even sometimes some activities that are taken mostly on your own, so I'm thinking here of a role of kind of baker, for example, does give you the student the capacity to contribute. So if your child likes cooking at home and they are someone who wants to you know, bake on behalf of, you know, when there's a fundraiser, for example, maybe the election day stall or something like that, that gives a way for that gift to be shared with others. So most importantly, I think for students with a disability, valued roles matter because they're a buffer to the devalued roles that people are likely to find themselves in if they don't have those positive roles bolstering up their identity in the eyes of other people. So it's really common, and unfortunately my son got cast into a number of these negative roles when he was in high school, and he got seen as a menace. You know, when he wasn't doing well in the school playground, he got seen as a menace or a troublemaker. He also got seen as a burden. So I actually have it in writing from his high school principal that he was an economic burden to the school. It's common for, you know, kids with disabilities to be seen as a special ed or unit kids. Some of you might have had the experience of your child being treated as a little bit of a mascot. So, you know, kind of cute and maybe feel good for other people that, you know, there's a child with a disability in the school or in the class, but without the same expectations that they would be, really embraced as an equal by their classmates. Visitor, so someone who maybe is, you know, really belongs in the special ed area, but sometimes visits the regular classroom. And to some extent, we can have control over those negative roles by some of the choices that we make as parents on our kids' behalf. But sometimes these dynamics happen and we don't feel like we've got a lot of control over those negative roles. But we do have control over building up the more positive roles in someone's life. So you can probably think of a lot more, but I guess my point is really that it's a very useful way of thinking, being kind of conscious of the vulnerability or the potential for negative roles and our capacity to build up positive roles. And it's a safeguard if you don't want, if your vision for your child is that they don't end up, defined as an NDIS client, then, working on positive roles is really very valuable and creative work. So this is Sean. I'm going to tell a quick story before I hand over to Lindy. So this is my son Sean when he was in year 11. So we moved to a high school in kind of year 8. Which was the first year of high school, but we moved him quite late because we hadn't actually got into this school initially. By year, kind of halfway through year 9 and into year 10, Sean was really struggling socially. It's a hard time for many teenagers, and people who are kind of teachers will also know that it's got a reputation, year 9, year 10. But he was really struggling to find his place in the classroom. He was doing lots of silly things like stealing boys' hats and throwing them. We was kind of remember a time when he, took a jar of orange juice and poured it all over someone's kind of uniform. He was really desperately crying out for friends and to be seen, and it was a really heartbreaking time because the more that he did that, the more we faced just kind of suspensions and exclusions and really, threats that he wouldn't be able to go on the school camp and other things that were really, really important to him. So he'd had some small roles kind of in year 9 and 10. So he'd always supported the volleyball, and he had been an art show kind of entrant. And, so I'd certainly worked for full participation in all of his subjects. But he really didn't have a lot going on in that extracurricular area. And I guess finally I found someone, and it's the guy who's in the kind of black shirt there, who agreed that Sean could join the rugby program. And this was really important because rugby was a really big thing at that school. It was really highly valued. It was mass participation. So basically everyone who wanted to play rugby was supposed to have a place. So what it meant for him was that he joined, the school had their own train that went from their school to the play fields, which were about kind of 20 kilometres away. So he would kind of traipse off with all the other boys, get changed on the train. It must have been quite a sight. He went to the training and participated there. And then he did a pretty stereotypical disability job of water carrier at the weekend games, but he was absolutely the most enthusiastic, participant in all of the war cries and the tunnel that the boys did. And he really added a lot of value in terms of that school spirit. And I think what we found was that he had a lot more social connections on the weekend, obviously. So he did the training, was during the week, and then Saturday games. The rugby coaches were people who had senior positions in the school, so became known in a more positive way, because I guess in that school playground thing, they were often dealing with behaviour, and that was kind of quite a negative interaction. And this was really much more positive, where Sean was seen with his strengths. He had experiences like his peers, and he had an identity as a valued team member. So I need to say that took a lot of commitment. So when your child is not, he could have been in the Fs, I want to say, but all of the people he wanted to hang out with were in the A's and B's, and he was not an A-B player for rugby. So it was actually his choice to be kind of the water carrier and to be associated with the big teams. I'd say it takes commitment when your child is not playing to actually, keep going. Drive all over Brisbane. It's quite a wide area that people can play. So it can be, up to 30, 40 kilometres that we would have to go on the weekend. I would also say that if I really look back and think I should have been braver in terms of asking for kind of more opportunities. So I think he could have actually kind of played in a lower grade as well as supported the A's and B's. But at that time I wasn't very brave because things had been pretty tough at school. One of the things that happened after Sean left school was actually that we got a call from one of the boys who said that a few of the guys were playing in a club team and would Sean like to join. And that's when I saw actually the power of valued roles, when other people are scoping opportunities for you. And the legacy is really that Sean is the same as many people who connected through a sporting opportunity. He's bonded to these guys that were part of that kind of rugby program. So he was hanging out and had an afternoon on the beers, not last weekend, the weekend before, with many of the boys in this photo. And you can kind of see that bottom photo is him at his 21st, where he insisted that they do the school war cry, which I think spoke a lot to what he got from that experience, the identity and the sense of self. So that's kind of, I think, most of that. I think so. It's time now for you to think about what are the positive roles in your school. So I'll hand over to Lindy. Squeeze out. And Lindy will squeeze in.
So this is probably very relevant for me at the moment because my girl is in year 10. And I do have a couple of boys who are also in year 4. So we're still quite aware of what the different roles are in schools that are just freely available for people. And so I would encourage you to actually think about what's available in your school. Sometimes that's the best way to start, is to actually look at what is already a role that's available. So whether it be a club member, and you can see that this is a bit of a list of examples, and the list is actually larger than this in the booklet. But you can see things there like play equipment assistant at lunch, being a fundraiser, so fundraising for various supporting marginalised people or people overseas, or being a student council rep, being a school banking deliverer, or a class role assistant. My girl did actually have that as a job in year 1 and loved it. Being an art supplies assistant, and in sports, obviously there's always a lot of different roles in sports, and even if your child is not particularly sporty, I think it's still good to actually give everybody an opportunity to get involved. Being a schoolhouse team captain, I don't know what the philosophy is like in your school, but in our school we have actually had team captains who aren't necessarily particularly sporty. It's all actually about them being good team players and keen to get together the war cries and the pom-poms and the decorations. So, and that's something that my girl is quite good at. In the arts, being a choir member or a band member is something that is often readily available. And being a thing like a photographer, that's a very good role for events, and actually taking the time to take those snapshots of school memories to get into the Facebook pages or the newsletters or whatever can be extremely valued. With special events as well and academic and clubs, there's often a variety of roles, and it just takes a bit of time to actually look into and asking key people in your school to find out what's possible, and then sort of looking at what your child might be interested in. So there's the method of actually looking at what's available in your school, and then obviously we have to look at what your child is interested in. So my daughter, we know very much that she absolutely loves art. She loves working in groups. She's not a big fan of being on her own, but sometimes it can be confused because she actually is not a big chatter, but she definitely loves to, she misses social groups and loves doing board games and working on activities and crafts and things together with other children. So that is definitely one of her strengths. And it's always been a good idea for us to remember the things that create her distress. So something that really bothers her is a lot of noise or a lot of chaos. So I will give you an example. Now she loves singing and was encouraged to be in her junior school choir, which was wonderful. The problem was, I think we underestimated just how much it would annoy her to have people singing very close to her. And I still remember going to the Eisteddfod and so seeing her having her, like, so it's a competition, and she had her hands over her ears mostly the whole time. Which probably was not a good reflection. Like, it sort of portrayed that she didn't really like the singing when obviously it was actually the noise involved. Something that the high school has actually come up with is a signing choir, and she has absolutely excelled at that because of course there's very little noise involved. It's just the music, and she has a wonderful ability to be able to remember signs and actions, and always has. So that's been a much better choice. So we're going to break you into little breakout rooms, and we would like you to think about your child. What makes them light up? So what are they absolutely passionate about? What are their strengths? And if you can share that with each other in your group, we'll give you a few minutes. We'll bring you back, I think, in about 7 or 8 minutes, and we will ask maybe 3 groups to share back about just the different ideas that you've come up with of interest that may be in your school that you haven't thought about. Sometimes we do have to be prepared to have a conversation about something if we are really struggling to find anything that exists. An example of that would be when my daughter entered her high school, we had to have a conversation about perhaps creating something, and fortunately we actually have a lovely art club set up now that she is very much a part of, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later. But there was not really anything like that for her. It was a lot of sport, and which she's not a big fan of. So playing to her strengths, we knew that at least being part of an art club, she would have an interest. She's very good at it. And it would also set her up with other people who are also interested in art and offer her those social connections. And so we had to have that conversation with school. So we're going to break you up now. So thinking about what is your child's strengths, sharing that with the other members in your group, and having a think about what sorts of opportunities are there already existing in your school, and what could you create? Okay, so we're going to lead you into a briefer activity this time, and this is called brainstorming roles. So if you're struggling to think about what type of roles your child could do, then it helps to actually think and expand your thinking. So we're just going to get you to come up with any interest whatsoever. So you don't need to be thinking about your child. You can just think generally. So here is an interest of cooking or hospitality. And we want you as a group to really explore how many more ideas you can come up with when you're working with other brains and other experiences. So here you can see the example. Are we screen sharing? So here you can see that there's an interest of cooking and hospitality. And so you can see coming off there's a brainstormed number of things of actual roles. So it's moving from an interest, an activity, to a role. So we've got home economics student, school fete cafe barista, catering assistants for Bastille Day, election day stall assistant, swim club barbecue team member, so on the barbecue at the swim trainings, functions waiter for school open days and art, end of term party host, and a cupcake stall baker, which would be a very popular role and really get your child known by everybody.
Can I just say one of the points of some of those is that, can you see that there's a number of those that you don't need the school's permission to pursue? So for those of you who are struggling with getting the school on board, there are some things that you're really able to, as a parent, take on. So you can put your hand up to be the end of term party host and help your son or daughter play that role. And it's helpful to look sometimes at the roles that nobody else kind of, where they're always looking for volunteers, if you like. So, yeah.
All right. So when you are deciding which role to pursue, and this is really something because we're aware of time, we know there are a few people leaving. So I think it's really important to always think about what actually has the most street cred. So you might come up with a whole bunch of ideas, but you need to be thinking about what's actually going to be popular with peers. What is a potent type of activity? So that is to do with the frequency of it. Is it every week? What opportunities might come from it? Will there be more social opportunities or skill opportunities and growth? And definitely think typical. So don't allow made up roles. An example that I would give of that is my girl was struggling on like a youth camp, and I got a phone call and I said, well, give her a role, because she does sort of struggle with just, casual interaction and that sort of thing. So give her a job to do, and that's going to make her feel a lot better. They gave her, I probably should have given way more direction, because they gave her a role of high fiver as everybody entered the dining room. So, which is obviously a very made up role. I've never seen anything like that. So, so do be aware of where sometimes people's thoughts do go. So we're going to split you off again into those groups. If you can just have a go at really brainstorming as much as you can possibly think of from an interest. So just come up with an interest. We'll only give you a couple of minutes and then we'll bring you back.
We're running quite a lot behind time, so I think we may need to move through the rest kind of pretty quickly. So we may not debrief back in the big group, but I hope that has given you an experience of just being able to kind of generate a whole range of options from those. Really actually amazed by the number of things that we came up with in the group around an interest in netball, and that it really shows that if you're stuck enlisting other people, particularly perhaps who've got more of a background in that particular area of interest, can be can be really valuable. So I'm just going to make sure the screen is shared again. So I'll just try and, one of the things I would say, I didn't say this at the beginning, but if you do have some questions, so we will try and go through the main content quite quickly, but Lindy and I are happy to stay on and either answer some questions as part of this or afterwards. So one of the things we want to make a point is to really be aware that competency is not a prerequisite. So the person doesn't need to do everything to a really high standard, independent. So this is not about people not having support. This is about people kind of being able to do some of the role or being seen legitimately in that role. And I'm going to kind of give an example. I think you've got an example here too, Lindy, about tennis.
Oh, yes. So my girl, we experimented with some Special Olympics for a while, and she did attend the Special Olympics tennis, which was a lovely group. Just unfortunately didn't connect her with a lot of people her own age. So there were a lot of people there who were, probably ranging from mid-20s, maybe up to their 40s. And my girl at the time was probably 12 or 13. So when they started offering a tennis club for anyone who wanted to get involved and try out tennis on a morning per week at school, we jumped at that, and she loved it and got to be part of the club and get to know other kids who are outside of her year level. So that was a very so just like all of my children and myself, we're not good at sport at all, but we all believe in just having a go, and fitness is important.
So this is an example. So with Sean, because he was being seen as a burden at school, I saw an opportunity. So they started a cycling club at his school, which was actually not just for students, but for parents and for teachers, and quite a lot of the teachers actually were part of the cycling club. And so Sean didn't then kind of ride independently. So this is him with his dad, Terry, and they did the Brizzy to the Bay kind of ride as a fundraiser, as one of their kind of first activities. So it meant that Sean got a uniform, went on the Sunday morning training, got to, if you wear lycra, you must drink coffee afterwards. But the more important part of that role is he got to, kind of have the kudos of riding a long way and, kind of complaining about it. But he became, so there was as part of that Brizzy to the Bay fundraiser, there was a school competition. So school cycling teams were competing against each other for who would be the top fundraiser. And Sean became the top fundraiser for his school, and also became that pushed his school to be the top school in that kind of fundraising effort. So he got to go to a kind of a cocktail party, he was an underage person at the time, so he didn't really get to have the full benefit of it. But he fundraised more than $1,000 through that opportunity. And certainly, even though the school leadership didn't really kind of give him much recognition from that, it certainly was recognition in the eyes of his peers and from the school. So just to say, sometimes you have to be creative and think about those opportunities. And here's an.
Oh yes, this is a beautiful story, and we actually feature this in the booklet. Claire entered a talent show, and really it was an opportunity for her to show the way that she communicated. It took her mother sort of seeing it it was advertised in the school newsletter, and seeing it for the opportunity that it was, and it has opened up a wonderful understanding and exposure amongst the entire school community of just what is possible for Claire in communicating with her AAC. And she actually did a really, really awesome job in the talent show. So everyone was quite thrilled. So yeah, a really positive story.
So this one you can read about more.
And this is my daughter Millie in year 6. It was a Christian school, so chapel was a weekly event and a significant event for the school. And she wanted to be a chapel steward, which is actually a very significant leadership position in year 6. And we weren't even sure if she would get it, but she applied for it, and I supported her to apply for it. And she did get it. And it was a really amazing opportunity to see that she routinely remembered every single week when she was supposed to go after school to help the pastor set everything up. She learned very quickly the entire procedure. There was only her and 3 other people who were chapel stewards, so everybody knew who she was. And what was really great is they knew her as the chapel steward, particularly the younger years. And my boys were actually in prep at the time, and I remember their friends saying, "Is your sister the girl who, you know, collects the money and lights and extinguishes the candles and that sort of thing?" And that was really wonderful, rather than being known for something else. So I got to say though too, I actually didn't make it to many of the chapel sessions because of my own anxiety and worry about something going wrong. And I just really didn't want to, you know, I didn't want to portray to her that I didn't believe in her. So I just literally stayed away, I think, except for like 3 weeks. But when I was there, I was really amazed at just how confident she was, and she really stepped up to it. So I think it's also good to question our own thinking, and sometimes just to step out in belief in your child.
I think the truth is, to do this well, we need to build our courage. You know, so often it is our fear that our child will be kind of exposed, or that, you know, maybe even that an idea that we have will be rejected, which stops us from kind of stepping forward. So I think we really need to work on that. And that's why I think that brainstorming, like I found if I could look at, you know, all of the opportunities that were in the school that could be a match for Sean, and I would write them down, and I would start, you know, paying attention to his interests, and again, brainstorming, then I could start on some of those things. Whereas when I just kind of, otherwise, if I didn't kind of write things down and actually make it concrete, I would talk myself out of doing anything. Does that make sense to people? Anyway, I'm thinking that many of us will have had that struggle in other areas where our courage fails us sometimes. So we, rather than talking ourselves out of things, talking ourselves into things.
And this came up in the group that I was in, it probably came up in a few other groups, the idea of how to actually improve the situation for your child. So in our booklet, we actually have this on a page, and it gives examples of how to go from good to better to best. So you can see in good, attendance occasionally, at least you're in a setting that's valued by other children where students of the same age hang out. And then better would be more regular, seeing the same peers again and again, small enough numbers that your child is being recognised and being welcomed. And the best would be something frequent, engaging with the peers because of that active contribution. So it's really a way of being able to plan your thinking to always be working for something better.
So an example would be Sean was always like an art show entrant in high school, but that was only an opportunity that came up once a year. So it was lovely, you know, when he'd go to the art show and see his art alongside, you know, the other students who were studying art, but it wasn't really getting to that best because it wasn't really frequent enough, and it wasn't really active enough, you know. So those things which had a lot more opportunity to interact with kids, like the rugby, was a much stronger role for him.
So, and this is another way of growing a role from just simply having a very simple role up to being a very contributing member. And an example would be my girl started out in this art club that I spoke about before, that took some initiation and collaboration on my part with staff members. But she went from being a student who's interested in art and enjoyed it to being very much a member of a group of girls that she now actively knows as friends. And then the art club were obviously the best people to ask when they started planning the school production to create the set. So then she became a contributing set designer. So that's an example of how the role has expanded.
So these are all kind of ways of thinking that I guess it's just helpful to practice.
So this is sort of a bit of a summary, really, of some takeaways. We won't go through everything that's in the booklet, but some key takeaways is, after being in the role for a while, always consider aspects that could be done more independently, and independence came up. Can your child take on some new tasks? Are there ways of just, working towards more of a contributing and key aspect of whatever they're doing? Do be on guard for any negative roles or patterns emerging. An example of this would be Millie loves science and is very curious. And we were having some problems a few years ago when it came to science experiments. And I suggested that maybe she should actually take on the role of photographer for her group. And that actually just worked out spectacularly, far beyond what I thought that it would achieve. And it became a very, very key role, because when they were doing their prac reports in high school, they could go back through, and she was very, very good at taking lots of photos, and they could see exactly what they'd done and use it to report the results and use those to illustrate in their prac reports. So that's something she continues to do today, and it gives her a sense of real contribution. And consider natural supports to build connections, pay attention to emerging relationships to nurture. So that's really thinking about key relationships that are coming into your child's life, and keep nurturing those.
I was going to say, one of the reasons rugby was so successful is that was one of the few times actually there was no support for Sean. So it was his peers who were kind of supporting him to, get off the train with all this stuff. And, it's probably only the first time he even needed a reminder of that. But he was really in the situation being over-supported by a teacher aide through high school. So actually the natural supports were much better than if I'd kind of decided to, take a support worker or ask a teacher aide to to be involved. So in summary, I think social valued roles are performed with other valued people in valued settings. Our advice, I would guess, is to look first at your child's strengths and interests, look for the opportunities that might be available in the school, but also don't be afraid to get help to create some opportunities. So if there isn't a science club and you think that's your child's thing, volunteering to set up the science club isn't a terrible idea. Role communicators are really, and there's more about this in your booklet, but they're ideas that it helps to not, I guess, to set the child up for success. So for a while, Sean went to cricket, but he really wasn't well prepared in terms of knowing the rules for cricket or even how to hold a bat. And so there are some things, like paying attention to the background that your child might need to know, the language, if you like, the setting, being familiar with the setting, kind of, knowing, for example, if your child is trying to do netball, gearing them up to what the particular positions and kind of roles would be, for example, on the netball court. And yeah, so just recognizing there may be background knowledge that your kind of child kind of may need, and always looking to deepen the opportunity to contribute through that. So we have gone over, and that's kind of, this is a theory that is taught usually in two days to 10 days. So we don't expect maybe all of that kind of to gel at this point, but just wanted to open that up for any questions or comments, either in the chat or it's, yeah, by taking yourself off mute.
Ruth has just asked, actually, is the booklet on the website? Yes, it is. So there's a friendships and belonging subsection in our Families for Inclusive Education resources, and it's in there as a PDF that you can download.
One of the things I'd encourage people to think about too is, you know, what are you going to do next? You know, what is something that, and I don't know if anyone wants to share, maybe an idea that you might have had from listening to some of the examples or doing any of the activities. One of the things that I guess SRB theory would tell us is that the best way for people to start their thinking is to think about how you would typically get that support need met. So to realize, you know, what are the ways that, you know, most people would get from, you know, from school to a game, for example, and generally it would be maybe carpooling. So how can your child participate in that way? So not to say that sometimes people might not need, for example, another, you know, some more adult support, but not to go to something, to start with what's kind of typical and ordinary first. And any kind of ideas that people have, or maybe people might have a good example themselves of something that's worked really successfully for them? I'll just jump in then. The picture here I actually just stopped screen sharing, but I'll just put it up very quickly. So this picture here with all of the boys in their suits. In the booklet, Bobby's mum, Tracy, shares this as an example that Bobby, for his year 12 formal, was the person who collected the money to hire the party bus. And she said that gave, you know, Bobby a really great reason to be interacting with his peers. She said that Bobby said to his, sent lots of text messages to his friends saying, Tracy needs money, give her cash. But, you know, it was, you know, like again, they didn't need to wait for permission from the school to take up that role. They just kind of volunteered. And, you know, Bobby, really relished that role. And it meant that he was at no risk of being left off the party bus because he was the organizer. Yeah. I might say something, and then I think in primary schools, a lot of my work was making sure Sean wasn't denied the opportunities that other kids had. So I really think it was helpful for me to have lots of relationships with other parents to know, you know, there were all of these roles at assembly, for example, that I didn't know he could have, that there were all of these things that happened in the classroom, like, you know, the person who collects the banking, or the person who, you know, on Monday morning, you know, puts up the weather, or, you know, whatever those things might be, and that he wasn't, even that photo of the volunteer at the Mother's Day morning tea, it wasn't necessarily presumed that Sean would do that. You know, they kind of maybe thought that was for the more, you know, that was just for a select number of students. So, you know, there's some roles that everyone gets offered, but I found that I actually needed to be, you know, asking a lot of questions and planting those seeds in the yeah. And then I always looked for the things that were, you know, mass participation. So swimming was a really powerful thing because it was really regular. School had a pool. Yeah, and it's become, you know, a number of those things that I've mentioned, like have become actually lifelong interests with Sean, and still a way that he connects with his friends. Anything else about primary school, Lindy?
I suppose in some ways, and I suppose it depends on your availability and what you find easier, but in, like, I found primary school easier. than high school, because it just seemed so much more natural and the opportunities were all there. And but it did take some vigilance and actually maintaining connections with teachers or key staff, and definitely other parents, and yeah, literally just making sure that everything was on offer to Melly, and that because she was unlikely to go, oh, you know, that's totally something, like, you know, pick it up at a message at assembly or whatever. She was unlikely to just, you know, cue into that and think, oh, I would like to be a part of that. So there was a bit of that extra, me sort of keeping my ear to the ground. Yeah.
So I always read the school newsletter. I think I was one of the parents who read every single school newsletter. I found when my youngest, I never read the school newsletter, but with Sean, I absolutely read the school newsletter to know every single thing that was happening.
In fact, I've got a bunch of friends who still ask me, you know, what's in the newsletter, because they know I've definitely read it.
And we would take up, I think, you know, those. Sean went to a really small primary school, but, you know, when they did Auskick or when they did something like that, we signed up. And I think so. And if you can't think of the things actually in the school, the other place to go is, where are the other kids hanging out after school? So they were basically, you know, soccer after school. You know, you just knew that, you know, 7-year-old boys were going to soccer sometime during their week. So it was really important that Sean was in soccer, for example. So, you know, and that way, then sometimes they would have a school competition in soccer, and then he was kind of ready and primed for that. Any other questions or comments? Or Lindy and I are really happy. So, you know, if you haven't had the chance to ask your question, or you've got an idea and you're just kind of feeling a bit stuck about how to take it further, I'm really happy to do that via email or by phone. So look, I think the booklet has lots of activities to start that thinking. We'll make sure we kind of send a copy and send a link, and really, you know, good luck. I think my advice is to get started in writing ideas, to not limit yourself, not edit down your ideas to only the things that feel realistic at this point in time, and to really, I guess, to embed this thinking as a habit, because once you're in the habit of thinking this way, it's amazing what sort of you will see opportunities absolutely everywhere. So that's kind of my advice. So good luck. Thank you. And I think our kids deserve to be, to belong at the centre of their school communities. And I guess it's our job as family members to stand with them to make that happen. So I wish you all the best.
Yes.